Mark Carney, before he became a politician, he wrote Values. And in the first chapter, he points out that Jeff Bezos' Amazon is valued by the economy in the tens of billions of dollars, while Brazil's Amazon, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no economic value until it is logged, mined, dammed, or cattle.
2026 marks a milestone for David Suzuki. In March, the renowned Canadian geneticist, academic, author, and environmentalist turned 90 years old. Suzuki is a singular figure in Canada. An iconic broadcaster and uncompromising advocate for the sustainable future of the planet, he's been Canada's most charismatic and influential public intellectual on television and radio for the better part of 6 decades. As novelist Margaret Atwood has said, it seems that David Suzuki has always been with us. I'm Adrian Harewood, and this is In Bed with the Elephant. David Suzuki's path to critical acclaim and fame was not a straight line. He and his family were forced to endure the hardship and humiliation of spending the Second World War in an internment camp, along with tens of thousands of their fellow Japanese Canadians. Suzuki first came to prominence in the early 1960s as a hotshot, Canadian-born but American-trained scientist. He eventually made the transition to become one of Canada's most articulate and passionate science communicators. In the early 1970s, he emerged as a broadcasting superstar as the host of the CBC Radio science program Quirks and Quarks, and then CBC Television's The Nature of Things, which he hosted for 44 years. For decades, David Suzuki has been unwavering in his commitment to speaking out about the unsustainability of the impact of human beings on the biosphere. He's urged politicians and citizens alike to act to preserve the Earth for the generations to come. While Suzuki has been called one of the greatest Canadians in history, he's also been pilloried and vilified by his critics, who've labeled him Dr. Doom and Gloom, an enemy of progress, an economic saboteur dedicated to destroying the country's lucrative logging and fossil fuel industries. Suzuki insists that the ongoing reckless development of these extractive industries imperils our collective future as a species. For a private person, David Suzuki has lived a very public life. His most recent book is a memoir in which he reflects on his remarkable journey. It's called Lessons from a Lifetime, 90 Years of Inspiration and Activism. David Suzuki, welcome to In Bed with the Elephant.
Well, thanks for having me. I don't want to get crushed.
Certainly not. David, you're not going to remember this, but I first spoke to you about 20 years ago, and it must have been the fall of 2006, the same year that you published your autobiography. And I was just starting out as a CBC host here in Ottawa. It was my first big job. And if I recall correctly, you were one of my first major interviews, and you were very, very gentle with me.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
You were very, very gracious. Yeah, and so I always appreciate it. So I want to just publicly thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for being so gentle with me. First of all, I want to say happy birthday. How does it feel to be 90?
Well, it's just another year for me. My father died when he was 85, and my mother died at 74. So every year since then, I feel is a gift. Every morning at my age, every morning you wake up and go, oh, I'm still alive. So that's good. I was telling my wife, gosh, as my testosterone levels drop, God, I'm getting smarter and smarter. Don't have to think about sex every hour. I am really getting smart. I'm going to catch up to her soon.
Well, you've talked about the fact in the 50s you had sex on the brain. You talked about that as a high schooler.
Absolutely.
Right. You've written that, quote, one of my worst characteristics is that I find it hard to forgive. I had a conversation with your good friend, Elizabeth May, and she felt betrayed by Mark Carney and the Liberal government. You are someone who seemed to place a lot of faith in Mark Carney. You seem to see him as being a kind of a thought leader that maybe the climate movement needed. How do you feel about Mark Carney today?
When I saw his Davos speech, I said, wow. That was a magnificent speech. I wrote him and congratulated him and said how glad I was. We have to remember that Mark Carney got in because of Mr. Trump. If Mr. Trump hadn't spoken about a 51st state, Mark Carney would not be our prime minister. So thank you, Mr. Trump. The only thing that I'm grateful to you for. And I met Mark years before he became prime minister. I was blown away.
By what? What were you blown away by?
That he understands what the climate issue is. He understands how serious it is. And I feel that he really wanted to get into public service because he wanted to do something about it. But he believes so strongly in the market and market pressures. He believes you can use various things through the market and through legal means to actually bring climate change under control. But, where he's wrong, of course, is the economy is too big and growth is what's driving it, us over the edge of the cliff. Now, he spoke in his speech about the rupture, and that, I thought, galvanized the world. But Carney's failure was in realizing that rupture goes right down to our rupture from nature. That is our greatest challenge. Yeah, at the economic and political level, you've got to deal with that rupture, and he's doing it in whatever way he can. But what about our rupture from nature? We haven't accepted that nature is the foundation of our existence, and our well-being depends on the state of nature. And so we're just going on a suicidal path.
So climate collapse is inevitable?
So they're saying that the rate of climate change is accelerating. The oceans are filled up, and we made a mistake. We thought we were going to keep going like this, but now we're at a point of inflection because the oceans are no longer a buffer for that heating. We're going to see an acceleration of the warming, and that by 2050, we are on a path to reaching 3 degrees above pre-industrial levels.
There's no way of reversing that?
It's too late. It's too late. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel published a special report and said 1.5, we must not let temperature rise above 1.5. That's the critical temperature where chaos happens. We can't predict or manage our way out of a warmer world past 1.5.
But David, how can you say that when you have grandchildren? How can you say it's too late? There's nothing that can be done. It's inevitable that the whole thing's going to go to pot. How can you say that when you have children and grandchildren? What's left for them then?
Well, you sound like all the people that are saying, well, there's no hope then. We've got to give them hope. Hope without knowing what the challenge is hopium. You want to give them hopium. I don't want to give my grandchildren opium.
What do you want to give them?
I want to give them real hope. Real hope is based on confronting the reality that the science has been telling us for decades now. But then what do? I can not imagine the world that my grandchildren are going to grow up in. I lie in bed twitching and just in real pain trying to imagine the world that my grandkids will grow up with, and I won't even be here to fight for them. It's agonizing to me. But that doesn't mean you stop doing anything. I'm saying what Finland is saying now. Finland recently sent a letter to all of their citizens, and it said, look, Finland is on the border with Russia. We have one of the longest marine borders in the world, and the oceans are warming. Climate change has kicked in. Shit is going to hit the fan. We don't know what it's going to be. There will be floods, there will be drought, there will be storms, and government will not be able to respond with the speed or the scale that is going to be needed when that does happen. Those of you that are going to be hit first and hardest are going to be in your local community. So get your act together. And they're saying start at every block. Who are your neighbors? I've lived in the same house in Vancouver for over 50 years. And in that time, I've known maybe 5 people by their first name. What the hell? The only reason I know those people is I used to have a dog. I had to walk the damn dog twice a day, and I got to meet my neighbors.
But whose fault is that?
Yeah, I agree. We're all hunkered down in our houses, and we have computers and TV sets, and we don't have to meet our neighbors. That's the way the city is. But if we sit down and meet our neighbors, it will be a joyous thing. Find out what your resources are. Are there people who are shut-ins? Whatever happens, they're going to need immediate help because they can't walk. Are there nurses? Are there doctors? Does anyone have a generator? Does anyone know how to operate a chainsaw? Are there pipe fitters? Are there electricians? Like, who are the people living in your block? Because they're the people that are going to be part of the resources you have to confront the crisis when it hits. And I think this is where the action has got to be. And if communities now work on their own resilience and their footprint, where are you impacting most in terms of the air, the water, and soil? Then can you get your community to reduce its ecological footprint? Well, if enough local communities do that, that adds up to a hell of a lot.
You've had this, some might call it a bully pulpit. You've had this platform for, decades now. Do you feel sometimes that maybe you failed?
I have failed.
In terms of trying to communicate to people how critical, a state we're in? Or do you feel maybe that you antagonize people with your approach? Could you have approached it differently?
Of course, I've antagonized a lot of people who've used that antagonism to say, oh, he's a jerk, he's an asshole, or he's anti-economics or whatever. Those kind of epithets are used to keep from dealing with a fundamental issue. So that's not my failure. It's that they have effectively stopped having a conversation. The reason the nature of things has stayed on air so long is not because of me. It's because people have continued to listen to the nature of things. It's the audience that has bought into it. The problem is that we always seem to have to choose between the economy or the environment, and the environment loses every time. My failure is in getting us to realize that the economy is a human construct based on utilizing our surroundings. Nature isn't something out there, separate from us, where we need laws to regulate how much we can take and how we interact with nature. We are part of nature. We are nature. We have air. Every breath we take is in us. There is no line between us and the air. It's here surrounding us. We're embedded in it, and it's in us. We are air. When you frame it that way, whatever you do to the air, you do to ourselves.
But David, what's happened? Because there was a time in this country, like almost 40 years ago in the 80s, like climate change was on the agenda. It was something that a lot of our leaders, political leaders, were really paying attention to and seemed to take seriously and seemed to want to change.
Yeah.
What's happened? Because it doesn't seem as if there's that sense of urgency to deal with this existential crisis.
Yeah, that's it. I think one of the fundamental problems is that 85% of Canadians now live in big cities or towns. And in a big city or town, everybody's highest priority is your what? What do you say, Adrian? What's your highest priority?
Your paycheck.
Your job.
Your job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we need the money to buy the things that we want. And so even for environmentalists, we have this illusion that, well, if we have enough parks out there, nature's okay. But here, my job is the most important thing, and the economy is the source of everything that matters. And so for 9.5 years, the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, said, we can't do anything about climate change. That's crazy economics. And in saying that, he elevated the economy above the atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. But that's the problem now. So that if the economy is doing fine, then we can worry about the atmosphere or whatever.
But I wonder if we even understand what economy means. And if we even have the conversation about it, because economy really, it's about the household, right? That's what an economy is. So the question really is, what kind of economy, and it's a question I'm posing to you, what kind of economy do we need in order to ensure that this planet remains habitable?
And you put your finger right on it. An eminent economist in Great Britain, Partha Dasgupta, 2 or 3 years ago, published a giant paper showing that nature doesn't appear as a fundamental part of the economy. And Mark Carney, before he became a politician, he wrote Values. And in the first chapter, he blew me away. He points out that Jeff Bezos' Amazon is valued by the economy in the tens of billions of dollars, while Brazil's Amazon, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no economic value until it is logged, mined, dammed, or grows houses, soybeans, or cattle.
It's all about growth.
It's all about growth. And nature is just a part of feeding that. But the fact that it's the foundation of our lives, without nature, we wouldn't be here, that nature is the raw materials for the economy, that nature takes all the shit that we make and throw back into it, and nature isn't even in that economy.
And that what we need to preserve is the atmosphere, right? Like that's something that you've said. We
Exactly.
we need to breathe.
Exactly. But do you hear all the objections to a carbon tax? We don't want to pay to use the atmosphere. And damn it all, we don't want to slow growth. Our current economy grows by using nature, and it uses nature in a totally unsustainable way.
I wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to In Bed with the Elephant. If you can, please follow us in the app that you're using. If you already follow us, thank you. And please do take the time to leave a rating or a review. It helps to get more people listening to our show. And please keep spreading the word about us to your networks. In a world drowning in misinformation and disinformation, never has the work of journalists been more important. That's why we here at In Bed with the Elephant are so grateful to our podcast's founding sponsor, Perfect Books, for their support of independent journalism. Perfect Books is an independent bookstore located at 258A Elgin Street in the heart of downtown Ottawa. Perfect Books, a store for book lovers. Your family, of course, had suffered in the Second World War, like 22,000 other Japanese Canadians. You were uprooted from your home. You were forced to go to an internment camp in the Slocan Valley in the BC interior. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact that being interned by your own country has had on your life?
Well, to the lasting credit of my mom and dad, they really kept us buffered. I was 6 when we were moved out. Now, let me backtrack a bit. My grandparents, both sides of the family, emigrated to Canada probably between 1902 and 1904. None of my grandparents ever learned to speak English. So what that meant is I never had a conversation with my grandparents. So my roots to Japan, I had to get them through my mom and dad. But my mom and dad were born and raised in Canada, never been to Japan. They were fluent in Japanese, but they were Canadians. Our next door neighbors, they had emigrated from Scotland. Their son, Ian, who was my age, was my best friend. Now, the interesting thing in retrospect is Ian was a Canadian. I, whose parents were born and raised in Canada, was a Japanese Canadian. So when World War II started, instantly we were no longer real Canadians. We were, I think at some point, government documents referred to as enemy aliens, even though we were born and raised, we'd never been to that foreign country. Anyway, for me as a kid, it was all an adventure. My dad suddenly was gone. He was sent to a road camp up near Revelstoke to help build the Trans-Canada Highway. So my mom was loaded down with me, my twin sister, and a younger sister, had to pack everything up, 75 pounds of luggage, I think. And then off we went on a long train experience to Slocan. And as a kid, I didn't notice that everybody on the train happened to be Japanese. Now, in the camp, of course, it was a lot different. Canada was now at war, so these people stuck off in a camp were a very low priority, so there wasn't much attention paid to the facilities we're living in, the food and all of that stuff. There were no teachers, so I didn't have school for a year and a half. But the important thing to me is that almost all of the kids that were in the camp spoke Japanese fluently because their parents had come from Japan. My parents were among the first Canadian-born Japanese. And so kids would flip from English to Japanese with ease, whereas I didn't understand them half the time. So they bullied me because I couldn't speak Japanese. And that drove me then to out in the woods because I didn't want to play with them. But there was a girl that would play with me named Daisy. And Daisy's dad was white. And he was in the army, the Canadian Army, fighting for Canada. But because her mother was Japanese, Daisy and her mom were sent to Slocan and interned. And there's a word for mixed race children, I no ko. I meaning love, no ko meaning child. So they're love children. But the way they called her I no ko, like it was an insult, like the N-word is for blacks. When Daisy and I would be playing, and these guys that would bully me would come around, and they would bully her until she ran away in tears. And my greatest shame is that I never had the courage to stand up and fight for her because they were the bullies against me, and I always ran away with her.
But David, you were only a kid.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
It's
but
nothing
I'm
to be
ashamed.
shamed like that. That's what happens with kids. You are intimidated.
Yeah.
You feel small. You feel diminished.
Yeah, I know. But in my heart, I feel ashamed that I didn't stick up for her and fight for her. But the important thing is that we were all there in the camp because of government racist policies. And we were the victims of racism then. And when we become racists, and that's what they were doing with Daisy, then racism wins. That was the really important and tragic lesson that we got out of that, I think, for me.
Can you forgive this country that you love, I know? Can you forgive this country for what it did to you and your family in the Second World War?
Those things happened. They were different people. They were different times. When there was compensation finally given for those of us, I refused to take that money that they offered because I said, what? That's to buy me off so that we never talk about this again? The important thing is that experience should be a very important lesson to Canadians, that it's easy when times are good. You can guarantee freedom of movement, freedom of speech, equality before the law, all those things you guarantee. The only time those things matter is when times are tough. That was an experience that we failed that test of our democracy.
20 years ago, David, you wrote, quote, "All my life, as an adult, my drive to do well has been motivated by the desire to demonstrate to my fellow Canadians that my family and I had not deserved to be treated as we were." Do you still feel that way at 90 years old?
No, I still feel the need to remind people of what happened to us, not so that people feel guilty or any of that, but to understand the basis of the way our country behaves. And the greatest injustice, of course, is what we have done to the First Nations. I mean, this was their land. It's been the colonization and oppression of First Nations that has resulted in them living on tiny little plots of territory and to fight for their rights to the land. And so, for me, the Japanese-Canadian experience should be a trigger to think about other injustices, especially towards First Nations. And of course, the bigotry we felt, it's still there. Whether it's directed at yellow people like me, it'll go to brown people and black people and Muslims. Bigotry is still there. And we have to use our experience to remind people of what Canada claims to be, and we better live up to it.
When people see David Suzuki, they see success. They see someone who has been a prominent figure in this country for decades. But the truth is that you've struggled with some things. You've had some internal struggles. You've had to deal with, at times, not liking yourself. You said, quote unquote, to this day, and this, you wrote this in 2006, to this day, I don't like the way I look on television, and I don't like watching myself on my own TV programs. A lot of people would find that curious. What's that about?
Well, what do you expect after 4 years of propaganda during World War II that says these slant-eyed, buck-toothed aviators in their planes going, "Die, Yankee!" and crashing their plane? That was the enemy. And when I looked in the mirror, that was me. And we had heavy propaganda about those people. And that's stuck with me. And,
Still at 90, do you still feel that way?
Well, I'm aware. I'm self-conscious.
I'm David Suzuki. If you watch a lot of television, you may think that people are awfully articulate, never make goofs or mistakes.
In the 1960s, you were a hotshot scientist. You had gone to Amherst College, graduate of Amherst College. You were a graduate of the University of Chicago. You end up teaching at University of Alberta. And then you end up on television, which is interesting because you've always had a bit of an ambivalent relationship with TV. You're very skeptical about it. You've actually said that television isn't very profound. And I'm wondering, for someone who's spent the better part of over 50 years doing television, given that it's not very profound, was your career a waste?
No, I'd like to think that it was useful. But if you want to measure in terms of success, I've been a total failure. I mean, I started in television because I was shocked at how poorly Canadians understood science and supported science. I left the United States when to be a scientist, it was huge.
Post-Sputnik.
Yes. In 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik, it was a shock to the world. And in the months that followed, that damn satellite was going beep, 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 telling us their superiority. The Americans launched their Army, their Navy, their Air Force rockets. Every one blew up. Meanwhile, the Russians launched the first dog, Laika, the first animal, the first man, Yuri Gagarin, the first team of cosmonauts.
The first woman.
The first Valentina Tereshkova.
Yeah.
And the Americans just said, we got to catch up to these guys. They're way ahead. And so they threw money at us. You see, I left the United States because my lab mate, Ruby Wilkerson, was black.
In Tennessee.
And we were just fantastic friends. And it just bugged the hell out of me that, if we were walking down the street, if there was a white person coming, she always, without any fuss, moved out of the way. And sometimes that meant moving right off the sidewalk. That really bugged me. Also, she couldn't shop in the same stores. She couldn't go to the same movies. She couldn't go to the same church. And I realized, and my wife said to me, you got to get out of here. You're becoming a racist. Because I began to just resent every white person I met. And, the lesson that I learned from Daisy back in the camp, when we, the victims of racism, become racist, then racism wins. And so to me, I said, I got to get out of this country. But Canada is different. Yeah, they don't support science. But my hero at that time was a man named Tommy Douglas, who was the head of the CCF. And the CCF was a legitimate party in Canada. We had Medicare. We had equalization payments where the poorer provinces got some support from the richer provinces who shared. Alberta doesn't want to do that anymore. But I like that we had that concept of sharing. We had Quebec. We had the CBC. We had the NFB. Those are things that said Canada was different. And for me, the differences mattered a great deal. And I preferred that, and so I left.
You ultimately decide to become a full-time broadcaster, full-time television broadcaster, and also radio broadcaster. Why did you decide to leave genetics?
I'm very proud of my record in science. I received an award for the outstanding Canadian researcher under the age of 35. And it didn't pay me money, but they said, your science is the best. We will give your university your salary so that they can hire someone to replace you, and you can devote all your time to science. And that was great. I kept that award for 3 years. I was doing full-time research, but it meant that I could also do my television work. But at the same time, I then started a program called Quirks and Quarks on radio. And I loved that. We got to a point in 1969 where the Nature of Things decided that they're going to go to a 1-hour program with me as a host. I couldn't also do Quirks and Quarks for radio as well, because either job was a full-time job. And so I very reluctantly chose television rather than radio. I loved radio. It's my medium, but I made that choice. But I had to go back to being a professor, or I had to leave the university to work full-time on the Nature of Things. And I made that choice because I'm just one of thousands of scientists that are making a contribution. But there aren't many people with an actual science degree and science background who are doing public media. My problem with television, it's a very powerful medium, and it can touch people's hearts. You know, you show an image of an animal being treated badly or a child dying of starvation. Those images have an unbelievable impact. But television, with the growth of all of the competing offers, every item, you have to be short and punchy, because otherwise the audience is going to switch over. So I think the media now are not a place for serious conversation about ideas. And it's even worse now with social media. And it doesn't matter how credible you are. You can develop a following. You could say, I developed a wart on my eyebrow, and that must mean blah, blah, blah. And everybody believes you. I worry about this, because how do we communicate with each other? I just despair about communication. I wanted to talk to Stephen Harper. I want to talk to Danielle Smith. But, they just say, oh, you're a foreign-funded radical, or you're anti the economy. And they have all of these ways of not even discussing the issue of climate change, because they dismiss you.
David Suzuki, it's been a delight meeting you once again. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to In Bed with the Elephant, a production of Ricochet Media. Let us know what you think about our show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. The producer, editor, and sound engineer of In Bed with the Elephant is Dave Sarrazin. Executive producers, Ethan Cox and Andrea Houston. Music, Parker Harewood. Graphics, Connor Kaloran. I'm Adrian Harewood. See you next time.